My talk is about how you can use your design superpowers, and I'll come back to that, but how you can use your design superpowers to drive and explore your product vision and strategy. And to a degree, I'll pick up the thread that Sam has started earlier today about how you can use prototyping to explore and inquire about possible futures. But before I go into the topic, just a couple words about me. I'm born and raised in the south of Germany, in an area called Swabia. But if I speak German, you probably won't be able to hear that anymore, hopefully. Really try to get rid of that like Swabian accent. And yeah, then went to the Bay Area where I fell in love with design. That was the first time I learned about design, where I worked as a designer. And then now coming back to Germany, settled for Berlin. And after a couple of gigs here and there, now leading design and research at Blinkist. If you're not familiar with the product, at Blinkist, we take the key insights from nonfiction books and since recently also podcasts, and we take them so you can listen to them in 15 minutes or less. Listen or read. And so we make sure that you can really get to those big ideas that matter to you. So we really see our mandate as digging through all the vast amount of information out there and really pick out those pieces of nuggets, these insight nuggets that are really valuable, and package them up so they're easily consumable. And that's what we do with our product. So what's the big idea of this talk? Again, as I said before, it's about using your design superpowers to inquire about the future and to, by that, drive your product vision and strategy. And as a designer, we're all familiar with building features. This is what if we get into design, what we confronted with. We build things, we launch products, we deal with features. And what I saw in progressing to a lead role was that I saw that the same principles apply to designing for strategy. And a quote of Daniel Burka, who used to be a design partner at Google Ventures a couple of years ago, always stuck with me. And I heard it on a podcast, and he said he sees design as the scientific method of the business. And what he means by that is he comes up with hypotheses, with assumptions, with big questions, but then he takes those and he visualizes them and goes out and tests them. So he can use the design process and the superpower of being able to make things visual super fast. And if you're able to make things visual very quickly, you can also test it very quickly. So you can apply design as a scientific method of the business. And this is what this talk is about. And I'll present to you a simple 3-step process that I use myself and that I found very useful at Blinkist of how you can do that. And then afterwards, I'll run you through a quick case study, a simplified version of a product we shipped, a feature we shipped that resulted from such a process. So, step 1 of the process is paint possible futures of your product. And that means, again, your design superpower as being able to take ambiguity, big questions, and visualizing very quickly. And by that, explore how could your product evolve in the future. So think about your strategy that you're struggling with. Think about the big question that everyone's raising at your company. Should we look at this competitor? Should we hop on this trend? There's so many questions, and probably also a lot of opinions. And yeah, what you can do as a designer is you take all of that, you can put it into a prototype or multiple prototypes, and then you can go and test them. And you can play back to your organization and ask, is this what you mean, or is this what you mean? And that tangibility is super powerful. Because if you have been part of a strategy process before, you probably are aware of the multitude of Miro boards, messy sticky notes, very ambiguous conversations about hypotheticals. And I feel like our role as designers, especially design leaders, is to distill all of this into what really matters and then paint those pictures of the future and use them as artifacts that you can go and test. Because at that If you do that, you'll be able to get to those underlying assumptions, and those are usually crucial. So you test something super, super broadly, and the goal of the prototype, as you heard earlier in Sam's talk, is that you want to inquire about the future. And in any case, you'll learn a lot about your product, and you'll come up with assumptions that you probably weren't aware of in the beginning. And you'll learn something new that you didn't anticipate before. So pick your time frame. For us at Blinkist, we're still a very fast-paced organization. So for us, a strategic time frame is between 1 or 2 years. That for us is long-term strategy. But if you work at a different size of organization, different scale, those time horizons might look completely different. So you can test those assumptions. And then what's the most important step about the process is taking those learnings you gathered and cast them back to where you are today. So how might you steer your product direction? How do you want to set the guardrails right now based on these strong signals you uncovered when testing your prototypes? So it's about guiding the product decision today, and by that also guiding all of these messy and ambiguous conversations with something that's a lot more tangible and also creates a lot of excitement in the organization. People are very visual thinkers often, so if you show them something that is exciting and it provides a North Star, that provides a lot more excitement than a lot of graphs and sticky notes and stories or like written storylines. And I want to illustrate this with a quick case study of something we shipped a couple months ago. And this is something we call Blinkist Guides. And I'll walk through these 3 steps in a condensed version, but I think it will illustrate the point very well of how we applied this process of visualizing ambiguity, testing it with real customers, and then casting back the learnings to drive where we want to go next. And if you open Blinkist now and you'll tap on something, on what we call a guide, this is what you will see. So here you'll see best-selling author Nir Eyal. Maybe you're familiar with Indistractable or Hooked. He leads through the topic of beating procrastination and distraction. And that he does by presenting some of the blinks, so some of the summarized books we have in the app, but also cross-links to a lot of other content that relates to the topic of beating distraction and procrastination. So we don't put the book at the forefront, we put the author and we put the theme at the forefront. And we also add some actionable takeaways, some articles, so we paint a fuller picture around the topic. And yeah, that has been the MVP we shipped. And I'll tell you a bit more about how we developed it and how learnings influenced the direction that you see here. So how we got there. Step 1, building these glimpses of the future. So we started the year with a bunch of challenges. So for us, as I mentioned before, we are a bite-sized company. We're a bite-sized learning platform, which means it comes with the inherent problem of lacking depth. So we had a lot of customer complaints around lacking depth, needing to provide more insight into a topic and going away from this surface level knowledge, which is super difficult for us. And we tried a lot with content experimentation. We've never quite been able to nail it. Another point that we have been struggling with is as our library expands, we had more and more problems with surfacing relevant content for our customers. Because the selection just became a lot more, more vast. So that combined with our North Star metric, which is engaged usage over time, so we want to help customers see enough value so they build a habit, led us to this vision prototype, and that was one of many, where we, as a cross-functional group, came together, all of these ideas, all of these problems, all of these challenges were put on the table. Then I took it away with my design team. We came up with a bunch of prototypes that painted possibilities of how we could solve all of these issues, how it could look like if we were successful. And this is one of them. So here you see you see a personality. So we believed in shifting more towards an approach where personalities are curating content, less us curating content. A personality leading through a topic. And you also see that it's more time-based, so you get a piece of content yesterday, or you got a piece of content yesterday, you get something new today that is unlocked for you, and tomorrow you will have something waiting for you that you can't access yet. So we thought by giving that timely element, we'll introduce some more habitual usage over time, and by having a personality in the forefront, we have more authority over what we recommend to our customers, because yeah, if people know that person, look up to them, that is a huge driver for trusting that person's opinion. And to put a topic at the forefront and not necessarily a title of a book. So yeah, this was one of these glimpses of the future that we developed. And we also believed in the idea of letting that person curate the content themselves. So we also have here, you see a few snippets where that person would talk about and introduce whatever's coming next. So step 1, vision prototype. Step 2, taking that and testing it with real customers. Or with real customers, but more thinking about what's the potential target group. So it doesn't always have to be your current customer base. It has to be the target group that you want to build for, that you want to expand to, for example. So we tested this in 2 iterations, and here's some learnings we took away from it, and as a simplified summary. And what we found out was, when it came to relevance and recommending content, relevance is super, super important and a driver for this thing to work or not. So what we found out in all of those testing sessions was the title has to be very either relevant or known, and the same for the person who's curating the content. So we wanted to double down on that. We saw the strong signals there. Let's double down on that. We validated the assumption that with something that is an overarching theme for our bite-sized pieces of content, we can provide more depth. So we also want to double down on that. What we saw not working so well, or where we got a lot of negative signals around, was anything that related to timeliness, so locking content artificially for people. Because our customer base, we saw, is very requires content to be available immediately. So on demand is super, super important for our customers. And not only for our customers, when we tested this with our potential target group, we saw that even stronger, because looking at a younger audience now, we see there's a lot more demand for just getting super, super fast insights super quickly on demand. And what we saw lacking still, and what we still got a lot of questions around, was actionability and takeaways. So we wanted to do something around that would strengthen the stickiness of insights a lot more than we were doing it before. And this is how this translated into this first MVP that we launched. We put authors first. The overarching theme stayed. We made sure we keep a overarching, an arc for all of these bite-sized pieces of content. And we developed these infographics and further reads, and we expanded them now to articles and all sorts of other artifacts that will help you make that more sticky. Like quizzes are something we're launching soon, and a lot more as well. And then we saw some first results. So what we did then when we launched the MVP was we benchmarked it, we A/B test benchmarked it against another content format that we have. So we call that collections, something that's similar but not curated and not to that extent that we saw here with guides. When we tested this, we saw 19% of customers who see a guide showed interest by tapping on it. And that was given that we just launched with 3, which already is a very limited selection, and it's very hard to have a hit on the topic or the author. So we already saw that by putting personalities in the forefront and having this overarching guide, it made people click on or show an initial interest. Then 60% of customers who tapped also started it. So we saw that actually the way we introduced the guide format also seemed to be sticky. And we saw an above 50% rate of customers to finish a guide after starting it. And given that they're always an hour or an hour and a half long, coming from our base as a bite-sized learning platform, also was already a very interesting signal, a very promising signal. And with that, I want to just quickly go through some of the key takeaways that I took for myself and that I also would like everyone to take away from this talk, is to really think about the design skill set as the superpowers that can be applied very broadly. They can be applied to designing features, but even more as you progress into leadership roles, into designing strategy. And the design superpower is to make things tangible and be able to test them. And by that, you can use design as the scientific method of the business. And we've been doing this a lot more. And yeah, it has been proven very, very useful, especially for like more fast-paced organizations. Anyhow, there's a few things that I would like to highlight to keep in mind. A couple caveats around this methodology. So, as I said, this is a fast-paced, qualitative approach, the one that I presented to you. And it does really work well for startups and scale-ups with a high risk appetite. If you're working at a bigger organization, you might want to add some more quant data, get a lot more conviction around stuff before you build something. We went to building an MVP within like 2 months. And in that sense, you might want to gather some more supportive evidence before you put engineering efforts on it, especially if your product is more complex. And I think one of the most important, or the most important point, to treat this prototype as the experiment design. And make sure you don't get into conversations about this icon, this color, this button, this treatment, because that's all not relevant for what this is used for. This is not part of why you built this artifact. And if that's something you run into in your organization, then you might want to shift to a different artifact or a different way to transport that vision that is not necessarily visual, because it will distract everyone from the key outcomes you want to achieve or you want to get, which are all about learnings. And yeah, with that, that's it. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.